Yes, I know I'm late with this video. I wanted to comment on this long ago, but only now got around to it. This is about a bit of YouTube drama that took place more than 2 months ago, when Computing Forever got pissed at Sargon of Akkad and accused him of the cardinal sin of being a Marxist. I understand that they've resolved their little spat like adults, so there's no need to go into that again. But I do want to address the subject matter, the charges of Marxism. The reason why I think this is important is that the label Marxist, much like racist and misogynist, is detrimental to a healthy conversation. We've created a sphere that allows a dialogue between left and right to take place, but for this dialogue to work, right-wingers need to get over the tendency of labeling every leftist position as Marxism. And since our sphere is dedicated to fight the regressive left, we all need to understand Marxism better and the role it plays in regressive thought. I have already made one video about it, but we need a lot more. You cannot rely on me to explain Marxism to you, because I am far from being an expert on the subject. I am averse to all forms of dialectic thought, and to Marxist thought in particular. Still, I thought I should add my 2 shekels to the conversation, because, first of all, unlike most of you goyim, I actually have shekels, and secondly because I think I have something to contribute to our collective knowledge. I encourage people to make response videos and educate us more. Someone who has already made a video about it is Dr. Layman, who gave a brief overview of Marxism's main tenets and explained why Sargon is not a Marxist. It is a good video and I encourage you to watch it, but I still have a problem with it. My problem is that rejecting the label of Marxism by explaining Marxist philosophy is a little bit like defending today's feminism by relying on its dictionary definition. My claim is that Marxism has devolved into something that is more like how Dave, Computing Forever, understands it. So I am actually going to defend Dave a little bit, but then I'm going to show that even by those standards it would be wrong to label Sargon a Marxist. So let's see what this was all about. It all began when Sargon of Akkad, whose real name is Carl Benjamin, or is it? Let's just call him Sargon. It all began when he was working on an episode of This Week in Stupid for August 21st, an episode dedicated to the infiltration of far-left elements into the Labour Party. With that on his mind, he was watching a live stream by Computing Forever and Independent Man, who were talking about the negative effects of feminist policies on boys' achievement in school. Dave noticed Sargon in the chat and invited him to join the live stream, and lived to regret that decision. They spent the first half hour talking about the subject, but at some point the conversation veers towards the corruption of the current capitalist system, and here's where the consensus breaks. Although they all agree that capitalism today has a problem in that the rich have too much power and wealth, they disagree on the solution to the problem. Computing Forever and Independent Man think that capitalism will eventually find a way to sort itself out. Sargon, on the other hand, thinks that we must take some drastic measures to narrow the wealth disparity and slow down the shrinking of the middle class. Otherwise we will drive the masses into the hands of the Marxists and find ourselves facing a communist revolution. And he isn't just afraid it might happen. He seems 100% sure that it will happen if we allow the capitalist system to continue on its present course. They spend about an hour arguing about it, until Sargon says he has to leave. My view on this subject is as follows. I agree that the growing disparity of wealth between the classes creates economic and social problems. But we are moving in the direction of a global society, which means that we have to think of the enormous wealth disparity between the first world and the rest of the world, or we will have serious problems in the future. I think that the globalizing of the economy is not just inevitable but also a necessary thing, in that it narrows the wealth disparity, creating a fast-growing middle class in the poorer countries. One day, this middle class will become rich enough to start consuming first world products, and then we will all benefit. But that is decades in the future, and until that day, the globalization of economy does indeed give too much power to the rich while hurting the Western middle class. I agree that we need to find ways to reduce the power and to deal with the social and economic strains that this puts on our societies, but I don't think that we are in danger of a communist revolution. Sargon likes history and likes to draw equivalences from earlier times to our time, and he thinks that he identifies in our society processes that are similar to those that led to the fall of past republics. I think that the system of today's Western democracies is a lot more robust than that of those ancient republics, and will require much more to be brought down. But Sargon, in the stream, sounds quite sure that the revolution is nigh. The problem is, he doesn't really know what should be done to curb crony capitalism and prevent the revolution. He does propose some measures, but doesn't seem to have a plan how to enforce them. As a result, he is all over the place, and at some points, particularly when he is criticizing capitalism, his arguments do sound like they are taken out of the Marxist textbook. Plus, since he is unwilling to accept his partner's position that the situation isn't that bad, he sometimes sounds like he is talking down to them. They end the discussion amicably, but the repercussion was soon to come. 4 days later, Computing Forever uploaded the video in which he talked about the stream. Evidently simmering with anger over what he felt was Sargon hijacking his livestream, and on top of that also patronizing him on his own channel, Dave is in a very ungenerous mood towards Carl, and gives his confused position the worst possible interpretation. And here's the conclusion he comes up with.
Carl, as you know, is one of the very best in this anti-feminist, rationalist, skeptical community of ours here on YouTube. And he very brilliantly calls out Marxist feminism for what it is. And yet, he is committing all of the same cardinal sins that Marxist feminists commit. His thinking is exactly the same as a feminist SJW. Marxism is Marxism is Marxism. It behaves the same way no matter what you apply it to, whether it's feminism or economic Marxism or what I'm affectionately calling Sargonism, okay?
Dave then goes on for an hour and a half to argue against Sargon. He basically claims that Sargon thinks that the capitalist system is unjust and that it should be blamed for all the problems in society. He labels this position as Sargonism and equates it to the feminist claim that the patriarchy is the source of all the problems, and he says that they are both just forms of Marxism. Like I said, that bit of drama between them is now water under the bridge, but I do want to address the charges of Marxism, and I'm going to do it by criticizing Dr. Layman's critique, which he uploaded a week later. Dr. Layman basically explains why Computing Forever's understanding of Marxism is wrong, on several counts. Let's begin with the part that we've already heard. To academic ears, what Dave says here sounds like mumbo-jumbo. First of all, what Dave calls feminist Marxism, more commonly known as cultural Marxism, is a really, problematic term. The rationality that characterizes the SJWs, the so-called cultural Marxists, is not a Marxist rationality. Secondly, it is nonsensical to talk of economic Marxism, since all of Marxism is economic. Dr. Layman points these two things out, and adds that consequently it is wrong to suggest that Marxism and feminism are similar, as Dave does when he says Marxism is Marxism is Marxism. Dr. Layman is essentially right, but I am actually going to defend Dave on this point. First though, let's see the rest of Dr. Layman's criticism. Dr. Layman points out other places where Dave gets Marxism wrong. For instance,
so Marxism looks at the world and says, for example, the wealthy, the bourgeoisie, are simply oppressing the working class by dint of being wealthy. Okay, the working class are just, their labor is a form of enslavement, it's serfdom.
This is indeed the wrong reading of Marxism. To explain why, Dr. Layman provides his own overview of the core elements of Marxism.
A. The belief in a primal society of mankind, where everyone is essentially equal. You have ideas of a very positive natural state of mankind that has become corrupted by social influences over time, according to, for instance, Rousseau. B. The belief in a dichotomy of oppressor and oppressed, that does change form over history, from slavery, for instance, to feudalism, but the mechanisms essentially and the idea of it remains the same. C. Historical determinism. There is an endpoint to which human history is striving to, and this is because of the history of class struggle that essentially both accelerated and directed human history. D. The understanding of the world as a material resource basis and a cultural social superstructure. And E. All of that culminating in a communist society, meaning a society that after going through all those predetermined periods in history, returning to a primal society-like state. A society where the dichotomy of oppressor and oppressed is finally broken. A society that reached the final point of Marxist historical determinism. And a society where the basis was finally changed to achieve all of this.
So Dave is right when he says that there's an oppressor class and an oppressed class, but, Dr. Layman explains, he is wrong to say that they are oppressing them by dint of being wealthy. The Marxist view is that the dominant class controls the means of production, and decides how much it rewards the dominated class for the labor it does to create the wealth. The oppression is in the fact that the laborers get a compensation that is much lower than the worth that they have created with their labor. Furthermore, Dr. Layman points out that history according to Marxism had several stages, although he doesn't explain how we get from stage to stage, and in every stage there was a different economic system and the oppression was of a different type. There was a time when the relationship was that of slavery and serfdom, but in today's society it is a relationship of exploitation. So Dave, according to Dr. Layman, is conflating two different stages when he claims that Marxists believe that the labor of today's working class is a form of enslavement or serfdom. Dave simply got Marxism wrong, and if we judge Sargon's position according to actual Marxist dogma, we will realize that he is not a Marxist.
I have never heard Sargon arguing for a primal society or Urgesellschaft, never heard him talk about oppression as a dichotomy, never heard him claim to be a historical determinist, and never heard him claim a final return to the natural state of mankind. So I don't see how Sargon can possibly be labeled Marxist in this context.
Now I want to criticize Dr. Layman by focusing on his description of this element of Marxist thinking, the relationship between the base and the superstructure.
I mean, with all Marxist analysis, people have the causality ass backwards. They look at the end product and they believe that this entire system must have been as a result of some sort of manipulation, some sort of exploitation of somebody. This is all set up to look this way.
Okay, man, I get that you might not be versed in depth about Marxism, but in almost all classic Marxist frameworks and in what is called orthodox Marxism, which basically is the agreed upon doctrine of the socialists at the Second Internationale, the base determines the superstructure, period. Right now, you have your interpretation the wrong way. While the superstructure does influence the basis, the material realities, the base determines the superstructure. This is absolutely central to Marxism, and if you miss this point, I think you are completely missing the point of Marxism.
Let's try to explain this. Every stage in history, according to Marxism, has a certain economic system. This is what is here called the base. This includes the resources used to create products and thus wealth, as well as the relationship between the class that does the work and the class that employs it and enjoys most of the wealth. This is the material side of our existence, whereas the superstructure is the spiritual side, the thing that the human mind creates on top of this base, such as culture, art, politics, science, and so forth. In Marxist thought, the material side is a driving force of human progress, so it has dominance over the spiritual. The economic system determines the culture. Elsewhere in the video, Dr. Layman points out that this is why it is wrong to characterize so-called cultural Marxism as Marxism, since the cultural Marxists focus on the superstructure and claim that it creates the base. For instance, the feminists claim that it is the patriarchy, the superstructure, that determines that women will be paid less for their work. So cultural Marxists basically turn Marxism on its head, and that is why Dave is wrong to compare them. What I am missing in Dr. Layman's description is a mention of the dialectic nature of the relationship between the base and the superstructure, and how it shapes human history. This is something that I focus on in my other video, so here I will be more succinct. As mentioned, man's nature according to Marx is to live in a society where everyone is equal. However, since the wealth man could produce with his means of production could not sustain such a society, human society was divided into an oppressor and an oppressed class. As the means of production improve though, the overall wealth increases, which makes it possible to imagine a better society. And so the oppressed class eventually rebel and create a different superstructure, one that is more in line with the base. This higher superstructure then shapes human minds that can come up with new ideas that improve the means of production, and so the overall wealth increases and makes it possible to imagine an even better superstructure. And so, through this dialectic process, humanity progresses in a deterministic direction that will inevitably lead to a point when the overall wealth will be enough to create a communist society, where there are no more classes but everyone shares the wealth. So I don't think Dr. Layman is altogether accurate when he claims that it is all about the base and how it shapes the superstructure. The superstructure also shapes the base, and this idea is no less essential to Marxist thought. Still, it is true that Marx gave more importance to the base over the superstructure. However, there was a point in history, around the 1920s, when Marxists started to feel like the base is already creating enough wealth for a new superstructure to emerge, and yet the superstructure failed to materialize. The Marxist philosophers of what became known as the Frankfurt School then shifted the focus of Marxism towards the superstructure, and claimed that the capitalist system is imposing a false consciousness on the people, making them believe that they are happy in capitalism instead of striving for a better world. And this is the view that became the mainstream of Marxism. So when Dave says that the Marxist claim that the system is a result of manipulation, he is not altogether wrong. Let's take hunger as an example. In the past, humanity was not generating enough food to feed every human, so it was nobody's fault that people were dying of hunger. The invention of the capitalist system was a step forward according to Marx, because it is a system that generates a lot more food. And so, in today's world, humanity's means of production have improved to a point that we create enough food to feed the entire human race. And yet, about 10 million people still die around the world each year from malnutrition. Why is that? I would say that it is mainly because of the cultures in the countries that have the problem. Cultures that breed corruption, poverty, ignorance, and violence, all factors that contribute to malnutrition. But Marxists see it differently. Remember that Marxism believes that the nature of humans is to share the wealth, and also that there is enough wealth now to solve this problem. So the only possible reason for it is that the capitalist superstructure is actively preventing the establishment of a communist system which would have fed everyone. That means that nowadays, capitalism is not just an unjust system, but a murderous system, which is actively responsible for the murder of millions of people. Similarly, the fact that capitalism is outstaying its welcome leads to the workers working more hours than they would in a communist state, which means that capitalism is basically enslaving us all. So when Dave says that the labor of the working class is seen by Marxists as a form of enslavement and serfdom, he is again not altogether wrong. The working class are not slaves to their employers, but they are slaves to an economic system that refuses to make way to a better system that is already possible. And once the Marxists started to focus on the superstructure, the next logical step was pretty much inevitable. The next step was the rise of Marxist activists who believe that all we need to do is bring down the capitalist superstructure and utopia will prevail. Forgetting that Marxism also requires you to come up with a new workable superstructure, they basically devolved into a way of thinking that maintained only two Marxist axioms. 1. That the nature of humans is to live in a utopian state. 2. That capitalism is preventing us from achieving that state and should therefore be taken down. This development already happened in the late 1960s, and it didn't take long before this attitude resulted in the rise of terrorist groups, which believed that sowing chaos and fear would snap people out of their stupor and make them realize their true nature and overthrow the system. All those leftist terrorist organizations that became so infamous at the time, the Weathermen, the Red Brigades, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Symbionese Liberation Army, Baader-Meinhof, all displayed this shallow, dumbass, quasi-Marxist ideology. Thankfully, this Marxism has been intellectually defeated by the end of the 70s, and the terrorist groups disbanded. If you go into a Palestinian refugee camp nowadays and ask the residents whatever happened to the Popular Front, they'll tell you he's over there. But it kept festering under the surface, and lately it found a way to return to vogue by latching on to identity politics. In today's feminism, for instance, we find the same idea that the superstructure is twisting our real human nature and oppressing people, in this case women. So when Computing Forever says that feminism and what he calls economic Marxism are one and the same, and that Marxism is Marxism, then yeah, he has a point. The version of Marxism that has been most visible in the last 50 years are these shallow and stupid manifestations of it, so I'm not blaming Dave that this is what he calls Marxism. But is Sargon a Marxist according to this definition? No, because he does not claim that human nature is to live in an equal society. Just saying that there are injustices in today's capitalist system doesn't make you a Marxist. A Marxist is someone who believes that capitalism as a whole is unjust, because it denies us the opportunity to live in a just system according to our nature. The Marxist, as we've mentioned, doesn't just believe that the capitalist system is unjust, but also that it is oppressive, enslaving, and murderous. This is not what Sargon is saying. Similarly, a feminist who believes that women are treated unfairly in today's society is not necessarily a cultural Marxist. To be a cultural Marxist, she has to believe that we are ruled by a patriarchy that is twisting our consciousness to go against our nature, and consequently oppressing us. For instance, those feminists who claim that women are oppressed because they cannot walk alone safely at night. They believe that rape is not the result of human nature, but something that the patriarchy is teaching men to do. So if the patriarchy was brought down, there would be no more rapists. This is the kind of logic that you can call cultural Marxism. Now, Marxists will probably argue against me. You say that we should not label people as Marxist if they aren't, and you admit that SJWs hold ideas that have very little to do with dialectic thought. Why then are you calling them cultural Marxists and associating us with these idiots? Well, I am sorry, dear Marxists, but you need to own up. I refuse to let you off the hook on this. The fingerprints of Frankfurt School Marxism are all over this phenomenon. Granted, it is Marxism that has been flattened out into a grotesque caricature, but it is still recognizable as a product of Marxism. Face it, this is what Marxism has devolved into. What the SJWs represent is the return of Marxism as a farce.